Okay, so today we're going to be looking at place value chart and metric measurement to compare decimals and answer some comparison questions. Okay, so we're going to be looking at comparing decimals, comparing numbers. So again, we have to really take a look at place value here. So, starting off with number one, we're going to express the lengths of the shaded parts in decimal form. Then we're going to write a sentence that compares the two lengths. We're going to use the expression shorter than or longer than in our response instead of greater than or less than because we're dealing with measurement. So looking at the first one, we can see that we have three full sections shaded. And we can remember that these sections are tenths. So when we go to label this one, we can see that it is 3/10. Now looking at our next one here, we see that we only have two full sections. Okay, so when we go to label as our decimal, we see that we have 2/10 shaded in. So we have a 2 in the tenths place. Now we have some hundredths. So when we go to count these, we see that we have 7 hundredths shaded in. So this decimal right here is 27 hundredths. We have 2/10 and 7 hundredths. Whereas up here we have 3/10. Now, taking a look at the shaded portion, you can see, obviously, our bottom bar here has less shaded. Looking over here at our decimals, notice how this only has one number after the decimal point, whereas this one has two numbers after the decimal point. But when we go to compare decimals, we start at the decimal point and then work our way to the right. So you can see that this has 3/10, whereas this one only has 2/10. So right away, we can see that this one is shorter, okay, because less is shaded in over here. So when we go to write this, we're going to write 3/10 is longer than 27 hundredths. Okay, and we're dealing with measurement, so we're going to label that as meters. Okay, now moving on to the next one, we can see for B that we have three full sections shaded, so that means we have 3/10. Then counting up our hundredths, we see that we have 5 hundredths shaded in. So we have a 5 in the hundredths place. Now our second bar here, again, obviously we can see more is shaded. So when we go to label it, we can see that we have 4 full squares shaded, which means we have 4/10 of a meter. Okay, so now when we go to write, we have 35 hundredths of a meter is shorter than 4/10 of a meter. Okay, now when I'm writing each of these, I'm putting the first number first in my explanation. We also could reverse it and then just change the wording. So for example, for letter B here, we also could say 4/10 of a meter is longer than 35 hundredths of a meter. Either one of those is fine. Now, when we go down to letter C here, we see that we have all 4 lengths from least to greatest. And I'm going to underline that so we make sure that we're looking at the right direction. Okay. So looking up here at our chart, we see we have these 4 numbers. Okay. Now again, we're going to start it at our decimal point and work our way out. So I want the least number first. So looking at our 10th place, we have a 3, a 2, a 3, and a 4. Okay, well obviously the 2 in the 10th place is going to be the least. So the first number I'm going to write down is my 27 hundredths. Okay, moving on. Now I see that I have 3 in my 10th place. Okay, but we have 2 that have 3 in the 10th place. So now is the time when we move to our hundredths place to compare our numbers. Now we can see that this is 35 hundredths, whereas this is only 3/10. So comparing this bar here and this bar here, we can see that 35 hundredths is more than our 3/10. Okay. Remember from our discussions too that you know that if we move this up here real quick, remember that 3/10 is equal to 30 hundredths. So when we go to compare these numbers, we can think about comparing 30 hundredths versus 35 hundredths. Okay? So now I know that 3/10 will come next, followed by our 35 hundredths. Okay? And then finally, the 4/10. Okay, so again, be very careful here with the decimal points. Okay, you go one place at a time. Don't worry about how many digits there are, just worry about what number is in what place. Okay, now moving on to number 2. What we're going to do is we're going to take a look at 4 fruits and their mass. Okay, examine the mass of each item as shown below on the 1 kilogram scales. We're going to put an X over the items that are heavier than the avocado. Okay, so going back, we are putting an X over the ones that are heavier than the avocado. Okay, now it's kind of a little bit tricky to see some of these images, but our avocado is going to be this first one right here. Okay, so we look here and we see that this is 2/10, this is 12 hundredths. Okay, well, this has a 1 in the 10th place. This has a 2. So this is actually less than our avocado. Okay, moving on to the bananas, we can see that we have 6/10 versus 2/10. Obviously, this one's going to be much greater. It's about 3 times greater. So we're going to put an X over that. Now, moving on to the next one, again, we see that we have 61 hundredths. Notice how this is 1/100th more than our bananas. Okay, so we have a 6 in the 10th place here versus the 2 in the 10th place on the avocado. So then obviously this one's going to be larger as well. So we're going to put an X over this one. Okay, so again, go to the 10th place first, then look at the 100th place. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at those 4 fruits, and we're going to express the mass on each item on the place value chart. Okay, so each one of them has 0 full kilograms. They were all less than a full kilogram. Okay. And we remember that our avocado was 2/10 of a kilogram. So I have 0 ones, I have 2/10. And then our decimal point. Okay. Now we move on to the apple. Well, the apple was 12 hundredths. So I have 0 ones, we have 1/10 and 2 hundredths. The bananas were pretty heavy. Okay? They had 6/10. So we would write it like this. And then finally we had that potato, which was 61 hundredths. So we can write that in our chart here. Okay. So now what we're going to do is we're going to complete the statements below using the words heavier than or lighter than in your statements. So now we have the avocado is blank the apple. So we look over here, we have avocado, again has the 2 in the 10th place, versus the apple, which only has the 1 in the 10th place. So that tells us that the avocado is heavier than. Okay. Now the bunch of bananas we see over here is 6/10. And we're comparing that to the potato, which also has 6/10. Now what makes this a little bit tricky is they both have a 6 in the 10th place. So now we go to our 100th place. Okay, well, we have a 1 in the 100th place here, but we didn't fill anything in for the bananas in the 100th place. So since we didn't write anything down, there's actually a 0 there. Because remember that 6/10 equals 60 hundredths. Okay, so now we can see that we're comparing 60 hundredths versus 61 hundredths. So now when we fill in our blank here, just ignore the little straight line there, okay, we see that the bananas are lighter than the potato. okay, because of that 1/100th. Now same thing up here with the avocado. We didn't write anything in the 100th place over here, but you can think about a 0 being there. Okay, so it's almost like a 0 being in there because again, we think 6/10, 60/100ths. Okay, 2/10, 20/100ths. Okay, now let's move on to some graduated cylinders, which connects to our science 2. So we're going to record the volume of water in each cylinder on the place value chart below. Okay, so remember, volume is the measurement of water. So we can see our 6 cylinders here of different sizes. Notice how each cylinder goes up to 1 liter. Okay, and we can see the measurements underneath. So we start off with cylinder A, we see is 6/10. So we would write that as 0 ones, 6/10. Okay, we don't need to write anything in that 100ths place, but if we wanted, we could put a 0 there. B, we have 3/10. C, we see that we have 9/10. And now D, we have 97/100ths. So we put a 9 in the tenths, 7 in the 100ths. Notice again how that's a little bit different from cylinder C. Finally, next one we have E. We see that we have 19/100ths. So 1/10 and 9/100ths. And then finally we have 48/100ths. Okay, written like that. So we have 4/10 and 8/100ths. Now we start taking a look at comparing with less than, greater than, or equal to. Okay, so now we're comparing 9/10 and 6/10. Okay, so we're comparing cylinder C with cylinder A. Well, 9/10 is greater than 6/10. Now we move to B. Now this gets a little bit tricky because if you notice we have 48/100ths compared to 6/10. Okay, now remember we're not comparing 48 and 6. If we go over here to our chart, we see that we have 48/100ths here versus our 6/10 here. So we go one place at a time. So we have a 6 in the 10th place here versus a 4 in the 10th place here. So that tells us our 6/10 is greater than our 48/100ths. And remember too that our 6/10 is also equal to 60/100ths. So now we can compare 48/100ths and 60/100ths. So you're going to be very careful when you get to that 100ths place. Okay, and then the next one we have 3/10 versus 19/100ths. So now again, don't think about it like 3 and 19. Go one place at a time. We have a 3 in the 10th place versus a 1 in the 10th place. You know that 3 is greater than 1. Okay, and you can also think about our 3/10, remember, is just like 30/100ths. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to write the volume of water in each beaker in order from least to greatest. Okay, so again, going back to our table here, start off with the 10th place. We see the smallest one here is our 1 in the 10th place, so that means our 19/100ths is the least. Okay, so that one's done. Next, we look at the rest of them. We can see that we have a 4 here, but up here we have a 3. Okay, so our 3/10 is going to be the next least. Okay, now we have a 6, 9, 9, and a 4. Okay, so the 4 now is our least, so that would come next. Now we have a 6, 9, and 9, so the 6 would come next, the 6/10. Okay, now again we compare our 9/10 and our 9/10. Okay, well they both have the same value of tenths, so now we come over to our 100ths. So now we have a 7 in the 100th place here compared to the 0 that is in there. Well, 90/100ths is less than 97/100ths, so that means my 9/10 would come next, followed by the 97/100ths. Okay, so that's how you compare with our decimals. Okay, you go one place at a time. Start with the decimal and start working your way right, one digit at a time.